Okay, so we will move on to number 6, which is our monthly budget report. So Scott Jones, Deputy Superintendent of Operations, and Assistant Superintendent of Operation, Deborah Jacobson. Thank you so much. Can you turn yours on, Scott? There, go ahead.
Good, okay. Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones with the monthly budget report. While Deborah's pulling it up for display to board members in the room and then also to the public, I want to thank all our staff for filling in the seats behind me to keep my self-esteem up for this particular agenda item, so thank you. The monthly budget report, I just try to do an attention grabber on this because it's so important.
You got us.
Okay, thanks, ma'am. So, Chair, it is serious and mandatory that I do declare that the Utah State Board of Education is financially solvent and able to meet all of its obligations and commitments for this current fiscal year. We are technically early in the fiscal year, you know, the fiscal year being, or having started on July 1st. Of 2021 and goes all the way through June 30th of 2022. The report you're seeing is as of September, which is the fourth month in September, right? Yeah, fourth month in the current fiscal year. Chair, any questions or concerns by board members? Superintendent Jacobson and I are ready to address those.
Any questions or concerns? I don't see any, so you can go ahead.
Okay, as part of, or an integral part of the monthly budget report is your discretionary funds report, if we could pull that up. Now, later in your meeting today, Chair, and for board members' consideration is the Finance Committee agenda from last month, which Finance Committee members made motions or recommendations to the board that'll be covered during the appropriate time, which is when the Finance Committee report is provided to you. I would just call out for attention leading up to that point is what you're seeing here are the initial, always subject to your direction and approval, of course, movements, if you will, or motions that were made, again, subject to your agenda item later in the day. I would also call your attention to the upper right-hand corner where you can see remaining balances in the board's discretionary funds report so that we can promote, if you will, or energize ideas for allowable use of those funds for any types of projects that you see fit. Again, it's at your direction and your decision on how these funds are utilized. Pending any questions, Madam Chair, by members of the board, that concludes the discretionary funds report portion.
I don't see any lights. Oh, I do see a light. Board Member Cannon.
Yeah, would you just speak to us about the superintendent's contingency fund
Sure.
and the intention of that money?
Yes, so I can answer that question now, Madam Chair, okay?
Yeah, that would be okay.
Okay, and we can drill down on it further when we get to the agenda. Essentially, it's the board's discretion or direction to provide the superintendent with their own discretionary fund. The past, we've provided the board have provided $150,000 to the superintendent. This year, what the difference is between the $150,000 and the $200,000 is we support the rural schools conferences. They take place typically in July, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. So per the agreement with them, Superintendent Dixon, who's in that position now, has requested an additional $50,000 go into her account so that she can, we can help with that, the payment for that conference. Madam Chair, did I answer Board Member Cannon's question related to the superintendent's discretionary fund?
Yes, we do have another question. I think it's on the same topic. Board Member Earl.
Thank you. It is on the same topic. So they've had an increase of $50,000 in rural schools this year? Do we know that?
So they're budgeting for the next conference, and so the increase would be for that next conference.
So it would be, they're expecting a $50,000 increase for the conference.
That's my understanding, yes, around
Okay,
that
so we
amount.
would be doing, sorry,
Yeah.
can I?
Go ahead.
Is that- So we'd be doing the 50,000 plus what we already commit to that. When I say we, I guess it would be the superintendent.
Yes,
But-
yeah. So I don't have the details yet on how much exactly they need, but we'd be in a much better position to support an increase to conference costs, subject to, to all of the processes taking place with them, who they contract with, et cetera, which I don't believe has been finalized yet. But we're anticipating that we would need some additional funding for it, so.
Do we have previous year data
What we do, I can,
on
yes.
what the
I can-
costs were?
Yeah.
I would be interested in that.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
maybe where those costs are going.
Okay.
So, thank
So
you.
Deputy Superintendent, could you maybe have that when the report comes for the finance? When it's
Yeah, so-
actionable?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, if it pleases you and the board, we'll have the data for when we get to the Finance Committee agenda item later this afternoon.
Perfect.
So that we can cover that.
It's
Madam
so
Chair.
pleasing, thank
Okay.
you. And I think that another question that may arise there, that may take a little preparation, is what was the other discretionary money used for in that account?
Okay.
Do you have that? That's been asked before?
Yeah.
Just for backup, okay?
Madam Chair, if I could clarify.
Yes.
How many years do you want us to go back?
Maybe last year.
Just last year?
Yeah, that's fine with me. That isn't, the person who asked it doesn't really know I'm asking you that, so.
Okay, all right. All right, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
so, okay.
Subject to any more questions related to the discretionary funds report, that concludes both the monthly budget report and this report. So, Madam Chair, I can turn it over to Director Young for the next item, which is the CARES Esser.
Thank you. We'll move on to 6.3, and Director of Strategic Initiatives, Sarah Young, and the Care Specialist, Sarah Harwood. So Sarah and Sarah. Thank you. Thank you. In case anyone's confused, that is Sarah Young down there. Sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
Yes, I am incognito, witness protection based on COVID. Anyway, so, thank you so much. Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives, here to present the board with our monthly update related to the COVID-19 relief funding that's available to K-12 in the state of Utah. As a friendly reminder, when we're talking about COVID-19 relief funding, the state of Utah has received several different awards from different funding streams with the U.S. Department of Education as well as the U.S. Department of Treasury through the Utah State Legislature. And so when we cover these, we look at them in terms of chronological order, so you understand the current state of funds related to those that will be expiring in the nearest future and so on. When it comes to the comprehensive set of funding that has been awarded to the state of Utah, this table presents a kind of overview of that particular effort related to the funds that have gone to our LEAs. It's important to note that over $914 million have gone directly to our local LEAs in terms of allowing them to have the funds necessary to create personalized plans for response to COVID-19. Currently, the State Board of Education is administering over 1,100 different individual grants awards for LEAs related to these efforts through the reimbursement process required for all of these federal funds. So in looking at the, again, original funding related to COVID-19 relief, this is our CARES funding. This is where we find our Esser and Year 1 funds that must be spent by September 30th, 2022. So that's going to be the most immediate in terms of funding that is available to our LEAs to meet needs in response to the pandemic. When we look at our overall reimbursement rate, you can see that we are getting really close to the 100% reimbursement mark related to both the Esser 190% that was funded on the federal allocation of Title I Part A, as well as the Esser 110% base awarded by the State Board of Education to those schools that would not have received a federal distribution. Those are 93.7% and 88.7% respectively. We've also seen increases in the reimbursement rates related to Gear 1. Again, this was the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, specific to providing services to support special education students as well as students at risk of academic failure. That's over the 50% mark in terms of reimbursement at this point, and we have seen additional LEAs reach that full point of reimbursement for their ESSER 1 funds, thus opening the door related to ESSER 2. Speaking of ESSER 2, so in the second award, which was received in January 6th of 2021, this is where we see our ESSER 2 and Gear 2 funds existing for awards for our LEAs that must be spent by September 30th, 2023. So one additional year from the original ESSER 1 and Gear 1 awards. As a reminder, these were awarded to the field in April of this year. Whoops, I seem to have lost that. Oh. We'll just click right back to that. My apologies. So these were awarded in April of this year, 90% again going directly to LEA awards. This is where we see the majority of our LEAs spending on addressing accelerated learning needs for students, purchasing educational technology, implementing summer learning, as well as after-school activities. It is to be noted that LEAs need to completely draw down and close out their ESSER 1 award before they have access to reimbursement for ESSER 2 in terms of not leaving funds on the table. When you look at the reimbursement rates, again, we're making, very positive progress in these areas. For the ESSER 2 90%, we're at 17.2% reimbursement of the total awards available to LEAs. Similarly, we're at 20% related to the base, and you can see we have 7 and 4 LEAs that have been fully reimbursed respectively. In terms of the additional awards that we have within this second tranche of funding, we do have our Gear 2 awards. This was again directed by the Governor's Office of over $12 million going directly to our LEAs on an allocation specific to the special education and students at risk of academic failure that they serve. However, they're fully authorized to use these funds to serve the entire population. We'll note that these were due to USBE originally on October 29th, 2021. Since then, the Governor's Office has approved staff in extending that deadline through Friday, November 12th, which is coming up next week, in terms of making sure that all LEAs have the opportunity to submit their application and claim these funds. As of this time, we have over 140 applications from the field, so we're really close to having all of the LEAs that are eligible at least act in terms of these particular funds. I'm also pleased to let you know that the University of Utah Reading Clinic submitted their application in the Utah Grants Management System and was approved. So they have an active award at this point to be able to seek reimbursement from the Grants Management System related to executing on the services approved by the Governor's Office. Last but not least, we have our emergency assistance for non-public schools. This is again providing equitable services to the non-public schools in lieu of that being provided directly through the LEAs, as is traditional with most federal awards. We have 22 schools that we are working with and are currently in process of providing services for them directly here at USBE. In terms of round 3, the American Rescue Plan Act, this is where we see our ESSER ARP, or sometimes is referred to ESSER 3, as well as our EANS 2 or ARP EANS that must be spent and fully for all services and goods by September 30th, 2024. As far as where we are in progress, we'll give you a more detailed update here in just a moment related to the individual LEA awards, noting again over 550 million of this 615 million goes directly to those LEA required distributions. As far as the state reserve goes, we will be addressing in study session both this month as well as next month actions as directed by the board related to the 5% the state is required to spend specific to addressing accelerated learning. As far as the 1% for the evidence-based summer enrichment programs and the 1% for the evidence-based comprehensive after-school programs, you as a board approved those in the October board meeting, and staff is in process of getting them uploaded into the grants management system so those entities and partnerships can begin to seek reimbursement related to the services approved in their applications. As far as the Esser plan update goes, we would note that as of October 20th, 2021, we have received 170 LEA ARP Esser plans. You noted in the Utah Schools of the Deaf and Blind presentation that we did open it up for them to be able to still submit an application. So we're expecting at least that one more to come in over the next month for action. As of the 20th of October, staff have approved 132 LEA plans with 38 plans in revision. I checked right before this meeting, we're down to 25 plans that are in revision. So we're working collectively with the LEAs to be able to make sure that their plans have met all the requirements and are approved so they can begin seeking reimbursement. We did have 9 LEAs that waived and or didn't apply for their award opportunity. As we've communicated before, LEAs have that opportunity to be able to make decisions about whether or not the funds are going to meet their needs and if they choose to apply for them. So with that, I'd like to, if I may, turn it over to Sarah Harward. She has done an initial analysis of the ARP Esser plans from the LEAs to give you a sense in a high level of what they've chosen to spend on based on the current submissions we've reviewed. Chair, if I may.
Sarah H.
Thank you. Sarah Harward, Cares Educational Specialist. Similar to an analysis we completed for the Esser 2 LEA plans, we did it for the ARP Esser LEA plans. And so you'll see that we've categorized how many LEAs chose to spend in each of the federal allowable use cases. And there are 19 of them for ARP Esser. So you'll note in the chart that there are more LEAs in the chart than we have in the state of Utah, and that's because our LEAs are allowed to spend in more than one category. And then on the side, we've got the categories ranked by how many LEAs chose to spend in each. And you won't see category number 1 because there's a federal requirement that at least 20% of the LEA's total award must go to addressing accelerating learning for that mitigating learning loss. But LEAs do have the opportunity to spend more than that. Allowable use case number 15 gives the LEAs an opportunity to spend more than that 20% towards that use case. So we see that 72 of our LEAs spent additional funds towards that use case, with 48 of our LEAs when purchasing educational technology and 45 towards capital improvements, including HVAC. And so with that 20%, like I said, our LEAs were allowed to spend more. And so we saw, we took an average, and we see that 33.8% of their total award is being spent towards addressing accelerating learning. So it's above that federal requirement of 20%. And again, the majority of our LEAs plan to spend in the categories of addressing accelerating learning, purchasing educational technology, capital improvements, including HVAC, and then student and community mental health services. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sarah Young, Chair.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Just to highlight a couple additional USBE staff actions for the board. Like I said, we've been working collectively with LEAs in terms of getting their individual awards approved. The current value that's been approved for LEAs is over $476 million as of October 20th. We're actually nearing the $500 million mark as of this board meeting, which is the majority of funds that were made available at the local level. In addition to that, we've been partnering with individuals at the governor's office Office of Planning and Budget to approve the LEA gear plans. Those go through a review first from the Governor's Office representatives and then from USBE to make sure there's alignment specific to the allowable use cases. So that partnership has advanced over $11 million of the $12.2 million that's available for award, and we would expect to award the remainder of that within the next several weeks. In addition to that, we have COVID-19 personnel that have been preparing data sets related to not just the LEA plan analysis that Sarah was able to share with you here today, but also gathering additional information to be able to prepare for leadership as well as you as the board related to being able to report out on the use of these funds in the community for the upcoming legislative session. Last but not least, I'm pleased to let you know that Utah's second application for the emergency assistance for non-public schools for the American Rescue Plan has been approved as of October 28, 2021, as well as the American Rescue Plan specific to serving students experiencing homelessness. That required state application was also approved that same day. So we have both of those in action with award letters so that we're able to move forward with distributing those funds to the community as required by the federal legislation. Last but not least, as a friendly reminder, we do have an existing state transparency dashboard that reports really specifically on the finances. So this is where any member of the public, as well as you as board members or other policymakers can go to see the current state of an LEA in terms of what specific funds they've received related to each of the different pots of money we've shared here today and where they are related to reimbursement of those funds. We update that quarterly, and that financial information is available on our website along with the additional details about the programs. So finally, in preparation for tomorrow's study session, we would just highlight that it's a great opportunity for the board to have time tomorrow to discuss the next steps that need to be taken related to the COVID-19 funding. Because we've received some questions about timing, I did just want to highlight for you a couple of items that are bringing this to your attention for action this month, in addition to kind of setting us up to really take those board actions in December. Two specific items. First and foremost is the required federal dates of obligation. So the Utah State Board of Education needs to commit the Esser 2 funds no later than January 6th. And by obligation, that is specific to the services and or the goods that are received either being on site or in a contract. So when we're asking for action related to those pieces, noting the procurement processes that we are required to take as a state agency, getting board direction in the December month is really our last moment to be able to kind of meet those components before this January 6th required date. Now, you'll note that ARP Esser has an extended obligation date not until March 24th of 2022, so a little bit more time for obligation. However, as a part of that, one of the requirements when the State Board of Education's plan was approved is that $30.7 million that's required to address accelerated learning has to be approved by the U.S. Department of Education before we are able to then take action and implement on those projects. Our desire to bring that to you for consideration at this time really is specific to giving us then as staff an opportunity to take those recommendations, send them to the U.S. Department of Education, and get feedback in the case that they were not to accept maybe some of the projects that are being proposed by the state of Utah. It would still give us time to be able to submit a secondary revision, which could be necessary. In speaking with other states that are in the process of submitting various elements and various plans, it is taking several weeks, if not months, to get responses related to these submissions to the U.S. Department of Education. So as staff, we just want to prepare ourselves as best as possible to not leave available funding to K-12 education on the table, which is why it's coming to you this month as opposed to holding on those ARP Esser elements. So with that it concludes our update. We do have an action item after, but I wanted to pause, Chair, in case there were any questions on the update.
Board Member Booth?
I'm just wondering if you could give us any more detail on how the LEAs are using or proposing use of the funds for social and mental health projects.
Chair, if I may?
Go ahead. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. So Board Member Booth, in terms of that, yes, we do have kind of highlights related to how LEAs are implementing their funds related to each of the individual use cases. And we'd be happy to share that with the full board so that you can get a sense of some of those highlights. When we say they're spending on accelerated learning, what does that look like in a specific LEA? We're happy to share those with you and the rest of the board.
That, okay, Board Member Booth? Okay, Board Member Cannon?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, would any of this money be available for training or doing leadership things for principals? Or for producing a principal pipeline of well-trained educators, that kind of thing? Where would that fit in? Or
Go
does
ahead,
it
Sarah.
fit in?
Thank you. So as far as the number one directive that's specific to all of these funds is that the state of Utah and/or the LEA for any use case needs to draw a direct connection to a need due to COVID-19. And so that's a key federal requirement in this. With that said, when you look at the federally authorized use cases, there are call-outs specific to supporting principals and leaders related to those efforts. We would just need to make sure that there was a very clear rationale with how that specific need is in response to the pandemic, as opposed to just a foundational need that we have here in the state of Utah.
Could you give us an example of what that would look like?
Sure. So in the case of some of the efforts that are being advanced related to the Utah Department of Health, so many of our school leaders have, kind of found themselves thrust into a world of public health that they just weren't trained for and weren't really familiar with prior to the pandemic. So using funds to be able to support training related to some of those sanitation, prevention, mitigation efforts related to responding to COVID-19 would certainly be an appropriate use case related to supporting school leaders with their responses that are necessary and necessitated due to the pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, were you going to talk about the next piece? Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this particular item has been fast and furious, so I appreciate the opportunity to bring it to you here today. This is specific to requesting authorization of the administrative funds at $100,000 to be able to work with an existing state contractor to create a dashboard that speaks to a return on investment or ROI, looking at 3 specific use cases for the COVID-19 funds. The current status of use cases, and I use the word current explicitly because we are trying to still figure out what data sets are available to us in regards to creating these outcome visualizations related to legislative request, include the high school credit recovery and specifically looking at the number of credits recovered as in comparison to LEAs that chose to spend their funds very explicitly on that use case. Special education student achievement data that you'll hear about more from Assistant Superintendent Nielsen in tomorrow's study session related to LEAs that used gear funding specific to serving that population. And then looking at K-3 literacy data as an indicator for being selected for the letters training with an intention of updating it with end of year data to show any sort of relational outcomes. This is very much specific to responding to some indications we've received at the agency that members of our legislature would be interested and would expect to see data from the agency related to not just speaking about the current financial state, which we have available on our dashboard, but more so looking at how those finances have led to potentially changing, mitigating, or addressing individual outcomes that we see in the state related to K-12 education. Because this is something that we would need to have available for the upcoming legislative session, that's why we're bringing it to you here today, to be able to seek authorization for those funds to get through the procurement process, to be able to pull the data and get it up and running. We're just in a real tight timeline there. So with that, the request would be that the board considers the authorization of up to $100,000 related to this specific need as staff move forward with the development of use cases. Clearly, that contract would come back to you for your consent calendar as well.
Okay, do we have any questions on this? First, we have Board Member Booth.
I just have a motion when you're ready.
You can go ahead and make that motion.
I move that the board approve the authorization of up to $100,000 from the ARP Esser State Administration Fund for the creation of a COVID-19 relief funding dashboard for reporting outcomes in the 2022 legislative session.
Do I have a second to that motion? I have two. Let's do Board Member Moss this time, okay? And would you like to speak to your motion, Board Member Booth?
I'm just wowed again by Sarah and her team. I can't hardly even believe when you look at the amount of money we've got to keep track of and the number of requests and the interface with federal requirements. I think anything that we can do to be supportive of those efforts to keep track of everything and to keep us moving in such an efficient way would just be the least we could do. I'm so appreciative of the amazing organizational structure that's there and the fact that we've got somebody who understands everything that she understands. Thank you, thank you. It's really wonderful. So I'm totally supportive of this recommended action.
Thank you, Board Member Booth. Board Member Hutchings?
May I ask a question?
Yes?
Just curious, I love the idea of getting this data. Is there an increased reporting requirement from the LEAs in order to be able to feed the data into the dashboard?
Go
Chair, if
ahead.
I may. There is not.
Board Member Lear?
But I just want to make sure I understand what you said, that it's going to take $100,000, or we're going to be you're going to, and I'm not doubting that you've accurately reflected the costs, but it would cost $100,000 just to provide that data that the legislature wants. Is that what you're saying?
So it's really specific to the creation of the visualizations, as well as creating kind of then the programming infrastructure that allows us as staff to then update it more regularly. So it kind of creates the boilerplate, if you will, and then as staff, we're able to maintain it more specifically.
And again, because I'm not a data person, freely admit that, not who Randy could give great praise to. This means that what we could all see, as well as the legislature, is we could see what's happening in individual LEAs, how they spent this money. Is that the picture of it?
So it's not just specific to the expenditure of the money, but it's also then creating kind of a relational visual representation of how that expenditure then is in any way, shape, or form related to outcome data that we're seeing in those three specific use cases.
And by outcome data, sorry, can I
Go ahead.
ask a few clarifying questions? By outcome data, is that student achievement data? Is that what they mean, or is that what we mean by outcome data, or student achievement data, or improvement of school culture? Right? So it's broader than just data. But is it those kinds of things that we would see? Is that what you're talking about?
Chair, if I
Go
may.
ahead.
It is what we're looking at. I will also note, we're also looking at credit recovery, so that would be more
Okay.
specific to the number of credits recovered,
Okay.
specific to LEAs that chose to spend in those specific use cases.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the,
Thank you. Board Member Cannon?
Jenny, you ditched me. Okay. So I feel, as an American citizen, a sense of responsibility, and as a state board member, a sense of responsibility. We have been given unprecedented funds to utilize during COVID. It's a whole lot of money, and I really want to be able to see that we've used that money wisely, and that money has been used to improve education and scenarios for students. So will this be able to give us something to back up an idea like that, that yes, we have been responsible, we've used this money wisely, and this money has gone to the betterment of our students?
Chair, if I may. So in terms of that, yes, and I would say that it is probably the first of several types of reports and kind of analysis that we'll need to do over time. One of the things that staff has realized in even the creation of this proposal is that, you know, we're still definitely experiencing the pandemic. And so to look at any of the funds through a lens of, oh, and we suddenly improved or it made everything better, you know, that's not really a realistic expectation of our schools and like our current state at this moment, but it does create the infrastructure and kind of the jumping off point for us to be able to report initial state so that we can update it over time related to additional outcomes.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't see any more lights. Oh, I see a light that went on and off and on and off and on. Board Member Earl?
It was the, you know, the feedback thing. I was trying to be courteous. My question, and it has to do with the mitigating outcomes. I'm wanting to know how we are, I don't want us to be interpreting things that may not, for example, we could say 43% of kids, we bought masks, 43% of kids wore masks, therefore, do you see what I'm saying? I want us to be cautious about making sure we have the measurements for whatever those outcomes are and not speculative about it. Is that what we'll be doing?
Go ahead.
So yes, we are definitely trying to be very specific about our use cases based on, number one, the data that we already have available to us, that we don't need to go out and collect additional data from the LEAs, that we're able to pull this together. But second of all, also specific to the goals of education. So when looking at maybe like the use case you're proposing, staff would generally defer to the Utah Department of Health to weigh in on some of those more like COVID case number mitigation factors. That's not something that we're looking to do here at the State Board of Education.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. So we're not, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Okay, seeing no lights, the motion before the board is that the board approve the authorization of up to $100,000 from the APR and Esser State, I was going to say ARP, because I think you guys do that, APR and Esser State Administration Fund for the creation of the COVID-19 Relief Funding Dashboard for reporting outcomes in the 2021 legislative session. 2022 legislative session. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you, Sarah and Sarah. Okay, Scott, we have October 1 enrollment counts review. I think that the reverberation may have been fixed. Jerry, did you get that fixed? He turned the volume down a little bit, so it might work now.
Madam Chair, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones, is it okay if Malia Makalva from Data and Statistics joins as well?
Yes, Malia, welcome aboard. Thank you.
While she's bringing it up, the presentation, Madam Chair, board members may recall that I had emailed this presentation to them as soon as we had the audited and finalized enrollment count numbers. Since then, obviously, there's been some media attention on this, but we just wanted to make sure as an information item that we followed up with you Specifically, we also want to make sure that, or as part of that email, I had said that by the time we get to board meeting, which is today, we'll have updated the one slide in particular, which is the Common Data Committee count. So if I could just progress through this just real quickly, I won't read it word for word. I know we're under somewhat of a time constraint, but I do want to make sure that we've covered anything and everything or any questions any of the board members have during this particular agenda item. So the first slide, we always provide the key considerations, what additional analytics we need to do or that we have done for this November board meeting. Here is where we have the differences between the October 1, 2020 count and this last count. You can see quite an increase in the student enrollments comparatively to where we were at October 1 of 2020. Next up, this is the slide. This is the one we got. Yeah, this is the slide we want to make sure that we pause just momentarily to update you on. So you can see that what the actual counts came in for October 1st in the first column. It's broken down by charter district and the overall state count. So the CDC estimate of the October 1, 2021 counts was 80,777 for charters. We were a little bit off of that. Then the count or the CDC estimate for the counts of October 1st, Common Data Committee, was 593. So closer or slightly closer than that. But the key takeaway here is that our projections, we did estimate or came pretty close to what we thought would be a return basically of kids to the classroom. So I want to pause here and ask Malia, through you, Madam Chair, if she has anything else she wants to add to this particular data or slide. Did I cover it okay, or you can correct me?
Malia's nodding yes, so, okay. So go
And that's
ahead.
important to me, so she
Okay.
does too. So
Thank you, Malia.
the rest of the slides are consistent with what we sent out to you originally. Again, it was just the common data, or no, there's some updates, right? No, yeah. So just the update was the Common Data Committee slide, but so these are consistent with what we have sent to you by email. They are public again. So particularly, there's a lot of interest in kindergarten enrollments. We provided those to you. New enrollments in grades 1 through 12, the trends there. Homeschool and private school is of interest always. It's all of interest, I understand, but these are particular data analytics that we provided last year too, and then coming into this October 1, 2021 count and all the impacts with COVID. Missing students slide, enrollment trend slide, otherwise known as the summer dropouts. Online and virtual school enrollment trends.
We have a question, I
Okay,
think.
sure.
Oh, we're okay. Keep
Okay.
going.
And that's it. That's pretty much what we wanted to cover
Okay,
with you
thank you.
too and information. So subject to any questions on the data, and again, staff are always open to additional information or data at your request.
I just want to thank you for sending this out early, that we could read over this and then ask you questions right then. So I appreciate that. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, my question has to do with kindergarten. We know that there was a decrease last year. Do we anticipate, I don't remember if it showed the actual difference between the anticipated lack of students coming in and then an actual growth element. Does that make sense? Those that would have come in last year that parents chose just not to because of circumstances, and then what maybe that actual growth was, if it's there.
I didn't create a display that looks at the projected by grade level. I think to really answer your question, I'd need to look at what was projected by grade level to see where last year the kindergarten enrollment was less than we had expected it to be. And then this year, whether or not it's close to what we expected it to be, or if it's above or below. I guess that this year it's back up to what it was 2 years ago. The trends over the years are not consistent, that it always grows or it always declines. It's kind of been up and down. So I think maybe kindergarten's a little harder to project than enrollment as a whole.
Okay, I guess my question is the growth, state growth would have also been part of those kindergartners that didn't come, so they would have been in first grade this year.
Right.
I
Right,
guess
yeah.
that's what maybe what I was
Yeah, so
asking is
actually.
what that percent was, or part of that increase would have been associated with that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I think actually this slide, the new enrollments in grade 1 to 12, probably speaks to your question more so than the kindergarten enrollment slide then. And you can see there was a pretty large increase in the new grade 1 through 12 enrollments this year. And some of that is very likely the students who would have entered kindergarten last year but didn't. And then they came back this year for their first enrollment in first grade. Yeah.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, if I may clarify something also on kindergarten enrollments.
Okay.
And what we're seeing is a trend. Birth rates are lower in the state, and so we're likely going to see continuation of declines in kindergarten enrollment. Comparatively, birth rates out, with comparatively to prior years. So then that tends to result in lower kindergarten enrollment. So exactly how much or by what percentage, I couldn't dare to guess, but that's my understanding is we're still seeing a decline in birth rates in Utah from other sources, that data comes from other sources. So I think in the future that we're going to continue to see comparatively with prior years declines in kindergarten enrollment.
Thank you. Board Member Straight?
Yes, I noticed that there was a decline in charter school enrollment by about 3,000 students. It was not quite, but, or am I wrong? Was it just the 14?
So this is the decline from last year to this year.
Oh, okay.
And then this is the decline from
Oh,
what was
okay.
expected versus the
Oh,
actual.
which is obviously
Projected versus
different.
actual, yeah.
Yes. Is that creating any viability issues among specific schools, or?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
No, so one board member had asked me when I sent the email, hey, are we concerned? And I think this is the question that Board Member Straight is asking, are we concerned about school closures or impacts? Obviously, declines in enrollment will impact funding. We do have the hold harmless year, but we're not anticipating any resulting closures, or there were several LEAs where you can see there was large percentages, double-digit percentages, but overall, we still feel the schools are viable and strong. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Straight. Board Member Earl?
I'm sorry, his question made me think of another one, so if that's okay. Do we have any idea outside, students coming in from outside the state? In other words, they've moved here in the last year. Do we know on?
So, Madam Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
So we're deep into the Common Data Committee process right now. I can better answer that question after we come out of that process in your meeting next month. So, Madam Chair, if I may, I can take that and come back to you on that one. Migration data is tracked by multiple state entities. I think migration was strong last year, but I can give you the exact and precise numbers. Or stronger. There was quite a bit of migration that did occur, but I can give you those precise numbers once we complete the Common Data Committee process, if I may.
Thank you. We'd appreciate that if you bring that back, so thank you.
ma'am.
Seeing no more lights, thank you so much. Thank you, Malia, for coming to the table. It is now 12:50. We will be back at 12:20. Is that right? Is it a half hour? 1:20. 1:20. Okay.
12:20 tomorrow?
Thank you. We'll break for lunch.